Chapter 176. She looks somewhat at peace. Roland looked to his right side where he saw Elidia's head sticking out of the bed sheets. She had stayed over for the previous night, and as it was a weekend they didn't really need to get up early. The store closed at regular intervals after a short period of functioning, just as he had promised in the contracts he made with his employees. Now how do I do this? He stood before a difficult decision. How could he slip out of the dreaded spoon? Elidia's head was resting on his arm while her back was pressed into his chest. Due to his sleeping resistance skill, he always woke up a lot faster than his new girlfriend. Thus it left him in a bit of a pickle whenever they did this. Elidia might have looked small and weak compared to him, but it was quite hard to pry her away from his hand. Thus he needed to wiggle free bit by bit while using his dexterity to his advantage. After some practice, he had developed a technique in which he replaced his arm with a pillow. There we go. After the deed was done, he slowly slung himself out of the bed that had been replaced for a larger model the moment he got together with Elidia. Even now he wasn't sure how it happened that two awkward people like them got together, but it just seemed that they were somewhat attracted to their own work ethics. This of course wasn't the only thing that they were going for each other. There was an obvious physical attraction there. As he was trying to tiptoe away from his bedroom, it was brought to the forefront. Where are you going? Is it morning already? Elidia's somewhat sleepy voice made him stop and turn away. She slowly sat up on the bed while rubbing her eyes, but by doing this she made the bedsheet slip down. This revealed her upper body to him. His eyes were quick to pick up on the womanly parts. This woman had quite the hourglass figure that was somewhat hidden away by the type of clothes that she wore. Long skirts to cover up her legs and tops that went around her neck. The first time he saw what was under there was quite the surprise, as her chest was a lot larger than what he had expected. "Hey, why aren't you answering?" she asked while looking at Roland's face. Soon she followed his gaze downward. "Oh, I was just admiring the view." He was quickly hit by a pillow to the face by the woman that he spent the time with. It was somewhat cute that she felt shame the day after the deed. It was clear that she was the type that preferred when the lights were turned off. "Your pillow throwing skill is improving," Roland commented while rubbing his nose that got directly hit. At this point, he knew that he should give her some space to get dressed, so he decided to leave his bedroom. But as he was about to close the door behind him, he heard a muffled voice call out to him. "I'll have breakfast ready in a bit, so don't go far." With a little nod, he closed the door behind him and moved towards the door to go outside. The moment he opened it up, he got tackled by a certain mystical ruby wolf. This wasn't Roland's first rodeo though. He braced himself for the impact by lowering his center of gravity. "Stop it, Agni!" Though he managed to survive the initial tackle of love, he wasn't able to dodge the wolf tongue that assaulted his face. His last resort was to turtle up before his face got drenched in slobber. "Down, boy, here!" To get out of this predicament, he decided to use his secret weapon. Agni looked to the side as he noticed something that was held out to him. "You want this? Go get it." It was a rather thick-looking sausage, which Roland promptly threw to the side. It was the type that Agni liked the most, thus he instantly jumped off his master to get to the food. "Stop jumping on me, Agni, I might not be able to survive it after you evolve further." Roland wasn't sure to what Agni would evolve when he got to level 100. But it would probably be a larger wolf creature, maybe even one that was big as a horse. While he was able to take the tackles, for now, he feared that in time it could get dangerous for him or the people around him. If Agni decided to tackle Elidia one of these days, she could actually get hurt in the process. The weather is fine today. When he stepped outside, he noticed the sun rising over the horizon and greeting him with a nice shade of red. If he was near a church, there would be many believers praying and bowing. It was a nice little gesture that they greeted the new day with. Roland felt a bit odd. He had been able to reincarnate into this world but didn't feel like praying. Many times he asked himself, how was he able to come here? It defied all logic and pointed towards there being a higher power. Even with the evidence there, he didn't really feel like praying or worshipping deities. Everything seems in order. As it was his self-created weekend and the shop was closed, he decided to just go around the compound that he had created. He arrived in this city about 4 years ago and went through some growing pains in the first year. After the store was created, the problem somewhat died down with only the Dwarven Union remaining. Even with them there, it was somewhat peaceful, all things considered. There were no close calls like with Robert in the dungeon. His brother had also stopped reaching out to him as much. Due to how well he scored at the academy, he was given a somewhat high position in the army. Now he was a true part of the kingdom just like he wanted. Robert was on a trajectory very similar to his father, but Roland didn't think that he would get that Baron title. The 2 other sons had a big leg up, but as his aim was to be part of the Royal Knights, he wouldn't really need the title. When it came to Lucien, he wasn't sure. His sister apparently was working diligently at the same magical academy that both Lucille de Vere and his helpful cat associate was at. While in a sense this gave Roland a good idea of what she was doing, it was also somewhat dangerous. If she somehow ended up walking in on a conversation that he was having with Lucille or the professor, he could have been discovered. From what he knew, his sister would probably rush right over here, which could bring his father along as well. Then his whole cushy life as a craftsman could be at risk. Then there was still the issue with who wanted to get him killed and the cultist problem that he was trying to forget. All I can do is prepare for that time. The past has a way of catching up to you. Roland had already created a structure for himself in this city. He was dead set on living here. His strength was reaching a level at which he felt somewhat comfortable. The next step would be getting into Tier 3, and for this, he needed to dive back into the dungeon soon. Before he could do that, he needed to create a new set of magical tools to help him defeat what was behind that stone wall. The biggest problem with that was the lack of funds. The resources that he brought back would not last him forever, and he still needed more products for his shop. Luckily had enough backlog to last him for now. Unless something pushed him over the limit, he probably wouldn't need to stress himself out over it too much. The checkup over his land continued as he started examining the detection devices that he had built. Magical turrets were placed everywhere, and the previously wooden wall was now made from stone and steel. At night it would be charged with a voltage that had enough power to stun a person. Small acts of violence and attempted robberies did transpire from time to time. Even though he was paying the Thieves' Guild some of his gold to keep them out, thieves from outside the city sometimes came to cause some trouble. They lived their life on the edge, as when discovered by the guild, their life would be forfeit after causing trouble. Breakfast is ready. I'll be right there. About the check to his defensive measures, he heard Elydia call out to him from afar. There was nothing better than enjoying a home-cooked meal by someone that actually knew how to cook. Thus he was quick to sprint back home. Even though it was just scrambled eggs with some meat, it tasted like a gourmet meal. How a skill could alter the taste so much was above him, but he could somewhat feel mana radiating from it, which probably added to the unique taste. Back at home, the two were now finishing up their food. The day had just started, and as Bernier was out of commission, Roland wasn't sure what to do today. But while looking at the person opposite him, he started thinking that taking a break from time to time wouldn't be such a bad idea. Are you finished? Ah, yes. He nodded while being lost in his thoughts. It was time to do the dishes, and then Elydia would probably need to go back into the orphanage. This was probably one of the biggest problems of this relationship, as both of them never really had any time to spend with each other. 1 day per week at most, as being stuck working long hours was normal. Oh right, I almost forgot. What is it? Elydia asked while cleaning up the table. Just wait a moment, I'll be right back. She was a bit surprised to see Roland rush off towards his workshop, but she didn't ask. The dishes needed to be done, and then it was time to go back to take care of the kids. While she enjoyed her stay here, the 2 troublemakers that were left to tend to the young ones were on her mind. After a minute or two, he was back with something sparkling in his hand. The moment Elydia saw it, her mouth opened wide. What is this? Oh, nothing, just a small gift, just give me your hand. He did ask for permission, but even when she protested he didn't stop. Soon a nice expensive-looking bracelet adorned Elidia's wrist. At first glance it didn't really look expensive, it even looked to be made from regular silver. It wrapped around her wrist through a thick chain, and the interesting part depicted a wolf shape. The inside of this wolf was all red with some smaller sparkly stones around it. "Put some mana into it," Roland said while Elidia nodded and followed the instruction. When she injected some of her mana, the red wolf gem started to glow brightly. Soon the glow started to change shape into something that looked like a picture. This is..." Roland nodded as what they were now looking at was something similar to a hologram. In the hologram Elidia could see herself, Roland and Agni standing together. This was a snapshot he had done with one of his newer inventions before. With some fiddling around he managed to store the image in the runic program and use an illusion spell to present it outwards. This was not some new technique or anything, as he had taken the knowledge from one of his research books. For one reason or another, the other runesmiths didn't bother with it too much, but for him, it was a nice way to show his gratitude. "Try not to use it too much, it will drain your mana fast and you might get a headache," he explained while pulling his hand away. The bracelet was made with some of the rare metals that he took from the dungeon. With this world being how it was, Roland still worried that if it looked too fancy that it would be a prime target for the thieves. "You can also hide it under your sleeves." While trying to explain his worries he noticed that Elidia was somewhat quiet. When he looked at her face he noticed that her eyes were glued to the accessory that he made for her. It took a few moments for her to realize that she was injecting too much mana into the bracelet, which was obvious as she reached towards her forehead. "That's why I told you not to use it too much." Roland placed his hand on Elidia's forehead. With the help of his mana regulation skills, he was now able to somewhat alleviate mana deprivation in other people. Normal people like Elidia without battle classes didn't have much mana and lacked any means of managing it. Probably holding the image for a minute would be the most she would be capable of. "Maybe this wasn't such a good idea, how about I make one without that image?" "What? No." When he asked for a return on his gift, he was given a loud rejection. It was somewhat funny to see the mostly serious Elidia protect her wrist and move away from him. He just moved his hands up into the air and smiled. "Fine, have it your way, just don't use it too much." For the following few minutes, he noticed that she was looking at the bracelet an awful lot. But the dishes needed to be washed, so it needed to be put to the side for the time being. Even then, her gaze was glued to it, which made Roland a bit stressed, as if she was overthinking the gesture. Soon they were finished and it was time to go back to the city. While normally Roland would leave the escorting duty to Agni, this time around he decided to do it himself. His house was now a small fortress with actual golems patrolling outside. Even when someone managed to break into the store or scaled the wall, they would be in for it. Elidia was back in her full get-up, which made her look like a Victorian maid. Her hair was tied in a ponytail, and with her glasses on, she could pass for a head maid of a duke household. The glasses gave her a very professional look, but they weren't really something that she needed. Only later did he find out that the glasses were just a magical item with the analyzing skill on them. Her eyesight was just fine, but she explained that she got used to wearing them for so long that now it felt strange to not have them on. It was kind of a refreshing experience after his somewhat hectic dungeon exploration. No sleep, paired with the constant stress of something appearing to kill him, was not something he wanted to face every day. With his advanced age, he started to learn to appreciate the little things, just as his slow walk towards the city with a woman hugging his arm. At this very moment, she was chuckling, as instead of his arm she was mostly gripping the cold gauntlets underneath it. "You really need to learn to leave the house without those. Better safe than sorry," he replied as they continued. While he had mellowed out after the years, just as Elidia didn't feel comfortable without her glasses, so did he without some of his armor. The gauntlets were something that he wasn't willing to part with, as slinging some quick spells could save his and Elidia's life. But their happy faces would soon change as they approached the orphanage. What seemed to be the start of a nice day quickly turned sour as Roland heard shouting. Goddamn bastard! Elydia and Roland stopped while looking at each other and quickly increased the pace. The voice that they heard clearly belonged to Armand, and as they arrived at the scene it was a mess. On the ground, they saw two men in leather armor. They were knocked out cold, but there were two more with raised weapons looking at Armand. Behind the two men was an older-looking gentleman. By his clothes he looked like some kind of rich merchant. Roland was quick to place himself in front of Elydia that was about to run towards her idiot brother. Luckily the men that Armand knocked out didn't seem to be proper city guards but just some hired bodyguards instead. What is this about? The scene felt strange as the old man didn't seem perturbed by the fiasco. By the merchant's side, he also noticed some kind of parchment that was now on the ground that the man was looking at. Chapter 177. What is that idiot doing this time? Roland stood there not knowing what to do. Normally he would just wait until Armand and the person he was up against argued it out, not like it was any of his business, to begin with. The biggest problem here was his relation to Elydia. She was right next to him and he could see the concern in her eyes. In the 3 years that had passed, Armand didn't remain stagnant. He had actually improved significantly and became a proper gold rank adventurer. The only thing that he didn't like was the choice of class that Armand went with. Name: Armand, level 111. Classes: T2 Fist Berserker level 11 primary, T2 Pugilist level 50 secondary, T1 Warrior level 25x, T1 Brawler level 25x. Just like the name implied, the class caused some anger management issues. Armand was already prone to mood swings. This was apparent during the interactions he had with him 3 years ago. The only reason he took the class was probably due to how overpowered the Berserk skill actually was. While this skill had many faults, the boost it gave its users was truly immense. At higher levels, this skill could actually be offset by other ones and be controlled. It was not such a bad choice for a close-quarters fighter as long as the people from their party kept their distance. As the name implied, the skill user would go into a sort of berserked state. During this state, he or she would focus on the enemies before them. As long as the user focused their anger on a specific target before the skill activation, it would be pointed towards it. The biggest drawback was probably not that there was a possibility of attacking their allies but the fact that they would abandon all defensive measures. The boost in stats would bloat up the muscles and turn the user's body into something close to steel. But even then, if the opponent's attacking power was high, they would just be rushing to their deaths. If Armand actually managed to master this skill and keep a somewhat clear head, he could easily go against other warrior types that were even 10 levels above his. Wait. But while he was trying to examine the situation, Elydia started moving forward. He had to place his hand in the way to make her stop. While his girlfriend normally managed to keep a cool head, it was only when it came to business-related situations. When it came to her loved ones and family, she didn't always think things through. I know, I'll step in if it gets out of hand, but if we do it now, we could escalate the situation. Roland feared that there could be more of those guards around. From his first impression, it looked like the men were just hired thugs. In this case, Armand punching them out could just be attributed to self-defense. A problem would only arise if they were actual city guards hired by the city or noble lord. If a person raised a hand against them, they would be placed in prison where they would remain until bail was posted or they were sentenced. See that man? Roland pointed to who looked to be the leader. The 2 remaining guards had their shields and swords out and defended him while he was glaring at Armand. Isn't that? He is part of the merchant guild, but you seem to know that already. Elydia's reaction to the man was a bit strange as he could see her flinch slightly. While he noticed this in his mind, it wouldn't be surprising for her to know him. The man was one of the members of the merchant guild in Albrook. It wouldn't be surprising that Elydia came in contact with him through her previous work at the Adventurer Guild. Also, I wouldn't worry about Armand if I were you, that merchant is in more danger than anyone. It was clear that the small group of guards that the merchant brought over were no match for this fist berserker. They were all around level 90, which put them at a big disadvantage against someone that went through their second tier 2 class change. The guards were probably retired adventurers that could not push themselves past the silver rank. This wasn't anything strange, as not everyone wanted to risk their lives by fighting scary monsters in tight corridors of a dungeon. Working as a guard for a merchant was mostly a lot easier, and the only thing they needed to worry about was bandits. Then during transporting goods, the merchant would also hire more adventurers for protection. The guards would mostly just surround their boss while the adventurers did the dangerous part of fighting off monsters and bandits. This didn't mean that it wasn't dangerous at all, like now the guards found themselves against a person that they couldn't handle. If Armand wanted, he could probably kill all 4 of them here. How barbaric! I came here to pass on the information. If you want to blame someone, blame the person that signed that contract. The merchant that was standing there pulled out a handkerchief that was made from some costly fabric and covered his mouth with it. It was as if this place filled with orphans was below someone like him. "You're still spouting that nonsense?" In response, Armand just shook his fist at the merchant that shrunk back. The difference in strength between these two was night and day. "Blasted ungrateful savages, I have given you the notice. If you don't comply with it, I will inform the city lord. I'd like to see you act the same when you get thrown into prison. We are done here, take those 2 idiots." The merchant started shouting back at Armand that remained standing in place. When some kind of contract and then notice was mentioned, Roland was a bit confused. Soon though he discovered that there was some kind of large parchment thrown to the side. It was mangled up, but it was there. Luckily this was when it ended. The other guards grabbed their passed-out colleagues before walking away. When they did, Elydia finally snapped out of it and decided to move towards Armand to ask some questions. On the other hand, Roland homed in on the paper that was to the side. "What is this? You are hereby required to vacate the premises. Failure to vacate will result in..." After getting the dirt out, he started to read through it. There wasn't much. It was clearly an eviction notice. It stated that the contract that they previously signed would be annulled and it would go per some clause that was in the previous contract. Are they just willing to pay the penalty for annulling the contract, or did they find a loophole to evade it? Roland wasn't really sure about how Elydia came to own this house. She did tell him that the price was quite low, as it was a building in an unfavorable location and there were many things to fix. This unfavorable location was probably due to it being close to the Albrook slums that had formed close by. After 3 years had passed though, a lot of the bad elements of the city had been pushed back into another location. There were even some shops and restaurants opening up close by. If this was the true reason, he would need to investigate further. "Hey, give me that." As he was approaching Elydia, Armand took it upon himself to quickly swipe the eviction notice from his hand. He never saw anyone crumble up a piece of paper so fast. "Hey, what was that?" asked Elydia while Armand just shrugged. "Don't worry about it, I'll figure it out." "Oh, I really hope you aren't planning on storming the Merchant Guild or something." Roland chimed in, as he clearly knew what was down on that paper. Armand was somewhat protective of his older sister. The two almost had a third confrontation with each other when it came out that he was dating Elydia. Luckily Lobelia was there and managed to talk him out of it. In reality, he attributed this to Armand knowing that he wouldn't stand a chance in a one-on-one battle with him anyway. Even now, after 3 years, Roland had managed to overtake Armand in levels. Everything ended in a contest of strength, which was just a simple arm wrestling contest, which he won. "Elydia, do you have a copy of your house's ownership contract?" "Of course I do, but why would you want to, then that parchment?" "Yes, it was in." Before he could reply, he could see Armand's hand move towards his face. His brother-in-law was clearly trying to cover his mouth before he babbled out the secret. Before Armand could silence him, Roland intercepted his wrist with his own hand. He had already proven that his raw stats were superior, so he didn't have much trouble in blocking this approach. "Armand, what are you doing? Did you go crazy?" Elydia shouted out from the side as she was taken back by what her younger brother was doing. Roland didn't blame Armand for acting this way. He was just trying to solve their problems by himself. He wouldn't be surprised if Lobelia got involved along with the Thieves' Guild to try to force the merchant to capitulate. This would be quite the risky maneuver, though if they ever got caught they would lose more than a building. Give it a rest, this is not something you can solve with brute strength. Roland let go of Armand's wrist as the two started struggling with each other. While he was stronger than the muscle brain, there wasn't such a big gap between them. Let's go inside before everyone from Albrook finds out. He looked to the side, people started gathering as they clearly heard Armand shouting. If they continued to cause a scene, even guards could shop up. Elydia had somewhat figured out the meaning behind Roland's previous words. Thus she bolted into the orphanage to go to the safe where the contract was. Armand and Roland on the other hand just headed in slowly behind her. Could you stop glaring at me, not like I had anything to do with that eviction notice. No, but if you kept quiet then Elydia would have gotten involved. Is there a problem if she gets involved? Roland replied quickly while Armand never let up with the glare. He understood the sentiment behind the white lie, but it was better to have someone that actually knew a thing or two about contracts help out. 3 years had passed and this place did start looking a bit better. Even though Armand had a falling out with the guild master, he was now a gold rank adventurer. So was Lobelia, who managed to get through the test a few months ago. With the rise in status came the rise in pay and they could finally start repairing. Elydia also had much more time to spend with the kids, so she made sure that the money was well spent. The number of orphans also didn't increase and a few of them were actually old enough to get their first classes and start working. It did seem like this place was on the rise, but apparently, the merchants didn't see it that way. It was still quite loud inside, but even the youngest child was past 5 and didn't need to be spoon-fed. Roland didn't really pry into Elydia's past too much, as it did seem that she was running away from something. Is this it? Yes, will you look through it? If you want. Both Roland and Elydia knew the pros and cons of contracts like this. While it might have been written down well, there were always certain ways to go around it. Roland started looking over the contract together with Elydia as they tried to figure out the reason for the eviction notice. Would have been easier if someone didn't throw away the eviction notice. Elydia grumbled while Armand removed himself from the room. Luckily Roland was fast enough to go through it. It said something about poor living conditions. I think they are trying to go with that angle to get back the house. There were certain laws in the city that were put on places like an orphanage. One of them was decent living conditions. It was a somewhat obscure law that no one really followed, though, as most people were already living in poor conditions. In this case, though, it could be a potential reason to break the contract. What we can do is go to the city hall and have someone inspect the orphanage, only then should the eviction notice go through, but it seems. Did they already sign off on it? Roland nodded at Elydia's question, as the inspector should have been sent to the house prior to the eviction notice. But the merchants had deep pockets and they could potentially bribe such an official to quickly sign off on it. I knew those bast. You be quiet, don't you even think about doing anything stupid. Armand peeked his head back into the room where Elydia and Roland were discussing the current situation. It was clear that if they left it in the hands of this muscle brain, he could get himself in a big mess. Now that there was no guild master backing him, it could go south quite fast. Elydia is right, if you touch a proper city official you might actually become a wanted man, but if you want to start a new career as a bandit, then go ahead. Roland shrugged while getting glared down by the large man. Then what are we supposed to do? Just pack our bags and leave? I didn't say that. We must first see who this inspector is that signed off on that fake inspection. We still have some time, no need to rush things. Roland gave out a sigh, as this was not what he expected when this day had started. Instead of spending some quality time with Elydia, he would need to pay a visit to the city hall. Even worse, if all things failed, the new noble lord might have to get involved, as he might be the only person that wasn't on the merchant guild's payroll. Where did it go? Oh, there it is, that man sure can throw them. A certain cloaked figure looked down at a rolled-up ball of paper. The person was of average build and height, but after closer inspection, there was something off with the hood. There were two lumps protruding from the hood, making it seem that there was something pointy there. A few moments ago the person witnessed quite the spectacle. Two armored guards went flying before their eyes. It was quite magnificent to watch. It only took one punch and one kick from the person named Armand to quickly disarm the two opponents. Regretfully, that was when the battle ended. The two parties just continued to shout at each other before the merchant and his guards left. This left this hooded person in a state of disappointment, as they wanted to see if the brawler was someone that they could hire. But as they continued to watch, there was more to it. Another interesting person showed up next to a woman wearing glasses. The person was quite big and radiated something to what this hooded person was well attuned to. It told them that it would be wise to not get involved with that person. This got them interested. Who was he? And why was he involved with the man that easily dispatched the guards? Were they just a strong party of adventurers, or was there more to it? Hope this answers some questions. An eviction notice. It became apparent that the people there were being evicted for one reason or another. This is getting more interesting, but could this really aid my lord? The hooded person decided to take the eviction notice, as there was more information about the involved party there. If this was something that they could use later was up to debate, but that man was somewhat intriguing. His class was special, but he is hiding behind some tricks. I need to gather more information. The person laughed to themselves before sinking back into the crowded street. Chapter 178. Hey, what's all the commotion about? Even some of the kids are crying. Can't you do anything by yourself, Armand? Did you make little Alfie cry again? A concerned Lobelia burst in through the door of the main room of the orphanage. There she saw a silent Armand just sitting there while Roland and Elydia were going through some documents. Good you are here, Lobelia. Could you stay and watch over the kids? I need to take care of some things at the city hall. Big sis? Sure, I can do that, but is something wrong? The half-elf girl was a bit confused about the situation. When she arrived, the door to the room was being crowded by half the kids that lived there. It seemed that they were trying to listen in on what was happening inside. Thus she took it upon herself to see what was going on, but inside she only found silence and strange looks. I'm not sure, I'll explain after I'm back. Before Lobelia could ask for some answers, both Elydia and Wayland were already walking out. What's going on? The only person that remained in the room with her was Armand. Though he wasn't very talkative either, though it seemed that it was because of the small ears that were listening in on the conversation. Lobelia would not let it end on this. If Armand wasn't willing to talk with the children there, they just needed to find a better place. You, come with me and explain yourself. While Lobelia tried to get some information out of Armand, Elydia and Roland were on the way to the city's hall. The last time he was here was when he was buying up land. The large plot of unused farmland luckily didn't increase in price that much, as it was still far away from the city. Roland might have implemented the weekend system in his own shop, but that wasn't true for the rest of the city. Everyone was busy peddling their wares and shuffling their feet around the city. The peddlers were peddling. Adventurers in bulky armor and with heavy weapons were going for the next adventure. It was like any other day for them as life went on. Due to Roland's tight work schedule, he didn't really have time to enjoy the sights. He saw the city somewhat differently than its citizens. For him it was like a slideshow of progress. Each time he came here there was something new being built, then finished. The never-ending expansion continued, and there didn't seem that it would ever stop. But how this place looked was quite deceiving. The old buildings had been replaced by new ones only in certain sections. The people with no money were pushed into the slums where not even the guards ventured in at night. Bernier told him tales of people getting robbed or killed there without end. Every day there was at least one brawl where a person could lose their life. He always complained that the guards tended to arrive late to only pull away the person that had lost the fight, as it was far easier than confronting the one that was left standing. The Thieves' Guild continued to prosper and only people that had enough money to bribe them were on the rise. Anyone else had to watch out. Getting their shops turned upside down for not managing to pay the monthly protection fee was a constant strain on their nerves. While thinking about how life was unfair for the less fortunate, he looked to his partner. Elydia was walking next to him while being quiet. They started the day hand in hand, but now they were just silently treading along next to each other without talking at all. "Are you okay?" Roland asked, as he knew that Elydia's mind was probably filled with the impending eviction. He was able to look through the notice and the contract. In it, there was a clause of a situation like this happening. Elydia now had at most 3 months' time to clear out the house before the city could force them out. He was sure that in this world they would not have problems in throwing orphans out to the street. The building would probably be turned into another inn or pub to serve the ever-increasing adventurer population. "Hey, yes, I'm fine." Her shoulders slumped forward slightly as she looked into the distance with an empty expression. He did not know what was going through her head, but for some reason, he felt like this was the right time to place his hand on her shoulder. "Don't worry, we'll figure something out." Roland emphasized the "we" part as he spoke out. At the same time, he brought the smaller woman closer against his own body as he tried to reassure her that he wouldn't let her go through this alone. His gesture seemed to have worked, as he could feel Elydia grasping his robe between her thumb and index finger before meekly replying, "Thank you." The moment she did, there was a strange feeling in his chest. He wasn't sure what it was, but it made him want to protect the woman next to him. For him, who had spent most of his time trying not to rely on others, it was strange. What was the worst-case scenario here? The orphans would lose their home, but what of it? They still had 3 adults taking care of them, both of which were upcoming gold-rank adventurers. With the amount of money they were making, they would probably be able to relocate to another area. Relocate? But that was the problem. What would happen if they moved? Could they even move to a big enough building to house 30 children of various ages? They certainly didn't own any land to build one on, and due to the city prospering, the prices were astronomical now. The most obvious move would be to place at least the youngest children at another orphanage like the one Sister Kasia was part of. The older ones could try finding apprentice positions at businesses, but would probably get a bad contract that forces them to work there for peanuts. Would she move to a different city if that was the only option? A strange thought passed through his head. What if Elydia decided to leave Albrook? She was talented enough to find a proper position at any other city, either in a shop or at a different adventurer guild. Armand and Lobelia were also gold adventurers who could find jobs elsewhere. It would be that hard for the trio to just move now if they really wanted. When he thought about her leaving, there was another strange feeling in his chest. This one wasn't as fuzzy as the previous one. He already knew Elydia well enough to know that she would prioritize the children over anything else. For him, on the other hand, leaving this city was something he couldn't go through. He had just started profiting from the secret room in the dungeon, and that side entrance with the Tier 3 monsters was also there. There was far too much here that he could profit from to leave. Now I'm overthinking it. First, let's see if I can find that person that signed off on that eviction notice. After some more walking, they finally arrived at the city hall. This building had grown in size as the city expanded. Inside there were many other people waiting in lines to fill out the proper forms. Thus the waiting started. Roland and Elydia had to take a number that was written on a steel plaque. The ladies behind the counters would then call out to them when it was their turn. This system was apparently created so that people wouldn't have to stand around for hours in lines. This is when it started, one of the worst days in Roland's life. It made the time spent in the mines locked with ant monsters seem like a vacation. After hours of waiting, he started hoping that a cult member could bust through the wall instead. They were sent on a wild goose chase through the large city hall building. As their number was called out, they were informed that they were waiting in the wrong line. They were taken on a tour through the entire building, and only after 8 hours of waiting they finally arrived at their destination. Ah yes, these are the inspection papers. Everything seems to be in order. Everything is in order? But there was no appointment given? No one ever saw this inspector. Sir, that is highly unlikely. The inspector had made a proper report about the building in question and they clearly agree that it is unfit. When the building is freed up, the children can be relocated to other proper orphanages. The person before them was an old-looking man. He looked tired and unwilling to help them. From the paperwork he pulled out, it seemed that everything was in order. There were dates of the visit and descriptions of how the building was in bad shape. Even if there was a problem with the inspection, it wouldn't matter. A new law has been passed. Ms. Elydia would need to get a proper permit to run an orphanage, which she doesn't possess. It seemed it was their word against the inspectors. It was clear that even if they took things to court, they would not have much ground to stand on. They would need to prove that the inspector was at a different location than at the orphanage. Even then, the inspector could just claim that the building looked bad from the outside and they didn't see any reason to examine it further. Then some strange law turned up that seemed to be custom-made to take over that building. If he didn't know better, he would think that the Dwarven Union is behind this. But if this was just a coincidence or if someone was just trying to cover all their bases was unknown. The whole thing stunk of corruption. It was clear to Roland that someone just wanted to get their hands on the land the orphanage was standing on. The biggest problem here was that it wasn't a proper orphanage like the Sun one ran by the Sun Church. This was also one of the points that the inspector went into in this document. Roland wasn't really that informed about the laws concerning that. By what the person explained, it was a bit out of the ordinary to have a privately run orphanage. Normally, to create one, a person had to go through the city or the church, otherwise, it wasn't really accepted as one. Normally no one would really care about those laws. If someone was willing to house unfortunate children, then it was fine. If there was no incentive to get the land, the city officials would probably just be happy that the urchins were kept off the street. Now on the other hand, they were given a pamphlet of the proper orphanage run by the church. Someone really wants to get their hands on that house. Roland mumbled to himself while Elydia was left staring at this pamphlet. Both of them were not outside the city hall as it had closed down for the night. When he saw her staring at it, he decided to be quiet as he didn't know what to say to ease her heart. The two then returned to Elydia's house while remaining silent. "I'll be off then." "Ah sure, I'll see you at the shop then." He wanted to give her some hope for the future, but it seemed that the city hall officials would do nothing to help them. Roland's standing in the city was also abysmal due to the Dwarven Union having it out for him. There would be no one willing to help him unless he probably turned up with an astronomical-sized sack of gold to bribe them. Elydia entered her home and he received a wave from Lobelia that was standing on the side. He knew that look she was giving him, so after a minute he joined her in the usual meeting spot when here. That idiot explained the gist of it. "It didn't go too well for you at the city hall, hey?" Lobelia was quick to pick up on Elydia's saddened face, and while Roland managed to somewhat keep a poker face, he also looked ticked off. "You're perceptive. Think you can find out what this is all about?" "Leave it to me, I'll probably need a day or two. Do you know how much time we have?" 3 months at most, but I'm not sure if they will wait that long." The eviction notice was delivered in a strange way. Probably if someone like Armand wasn't living there, the merchant could have been planning to just throw them out without waiting. It was clear that they thought themselves above the law. "I'd watch out. If they bought an official from the city hall, they could have guards on their payroll too. You should probably bring this up with Armand, otherwise he might find himself in a heap of trouble. The next time they came around, they could even place some city guards among them. If Armand actually went against one of them, there would be consequences. Even his gold adventurer rank wouldn't help him out. Don't worry, I'll knock some sense into him." Lobelia turned around and was about to head out to get more information, but before that could happen she glanced to the side. Roland followed her gaze, but he only saw some people walking around. "Is there something? Must be my imagination. Anyway, thank you for taking care of Elydia for me, brother-in-law. Could you stop calling me that? We aren't married." "Yet you mean?" Lobelia finished the sentence and skipped away to tend to her business. The half-elf started calling him brother-in-law after they got together. To her, they were already good as married, but he felt like there was no reason to rush things. Then there were the orphans that were on Elydia's mind, which would probably keep her from wanting her own kids for a while. There she goes, what do I need to do? It was already late, so Roland turned around and headed towards the city gate. On his mind were some options for taking care of the problem. There were even some crazy ones in there, where he contemplated setting some tents upon his land for the kids to stay. His own house would not be large enough to contain all those children. Then there would be the problem with his workshop. He could not have young kids running around in his compound poking the runic items. The amount of gold he had was also minimal. Some of the precious metals he nabbed from the dungeon were already sold off after his return. He could not really afford to keep the kids there nor build a new home for them. Seeing how it went for Elydia, he would probably need to first get some kind of permit to make an orphanage. But if someone was bribing the officials, then it would probably be a dead end. Why does this always happen when things seem to calm down? I still need to deliver that golem to that lord, the lord. For a moment Roland looked back towards the city. There in the distance, he saw a bit of the villa that the lord was supposed to live in. He was a yet unfamiliar element in the city that might have not been affected by the various merchants. To rely on a noble. This was a proper option, as the city lord had the power to force a change. This was also not a law produced by the main Duke Hose, as it just concerned the city that he was the leader of. It might be worth a shot. While Roland didn't like to rely on others, he was somewhat out of ideas. Either he asked the new leader to help him out, or he could try helping Elydia to get another property. If they didn't manage, the kids could also be moved to the church, but knowing Elydia, she would probably sooner leave the city to go look for another place to stay than to leave the children up to the church. As Roland was close to getting home, he realized that he was a lot more concerned about this situation than he should. In reality, he did not know Elydia for that long. Normally he should have been fine with whatever happened. His position in the city was not in danger, and he was about to make a breakthrough. Am I getting old? He gave out a sigh while shaking his head. Maybe it was the newfound love or the dislike for change, but he wanted things to remain how they were. Things had finally started to click for him, and now he was unwilling to let it go. He had been running for his entire life, and now he was more than unwilling to let others take what he had worked for. Chapter 179. Excuse me, could I take a look at that sword there? Hello. Oh, my apologies, which sword did you want? Two women were talking with each other, both of them were wearing glasses. One of them was wearing a somewhat intricate-looking uniform that made her look like a maid from an aristocrat's house. The other lady was wearing hardened leather armor and had protruding ears, which were synonymous with a member of a beast tribe. The girl from the beast tribe looked at the short sword that she was handed. There was a string attachment at the hilt that she had never seen before in any other store. A piece of paper was glued to this string. On it was the description of what this magical item was. Normally the shops didn't go into this much detail about their wares, and a person needed to ask the clerk for a full description. I see that you have noticed it already. Each item is categorized and also has a short description. If you decide on a purchase, we also include a small instruction manual. Instruction manual. The girl in the leather armor looked over the weapon and the description. On the small piece of paper, it said that this weapon was an ether deep steel short sword, with a dual runic enchantment. Yes, you will find a few helpful tips on how to use the enchantment effectively. With your purchase you will also be given a token. You can then redeem it for one free repair of the runic enchantment. Oh! The girl that looked like an adventurer started looking at the sword while the lady behind the counter continued to talk. After a moment she put the sword away. It also noticed a rather large beast that was covered in gems was looking at her. The moment she raised the sword in the air, the monster continued to stare. Thank you, I'll have to think about it. The person from the beast tribe bowed her head, but it didn't seem that she would be buying this weapon. Oh, could I interest you in a pamphlet then? It will clue you in on the current prices. Really? Then I shall take one, if it's free, that is. The girl chuckled while the lady behind the counter nodded and brought over some papers. On it were drawings of some weapons with prices next to them. Soon the girl adventurer removed herself from the store. The door that opened up automatically was also something that piqued her interest. Wayland's Runic Emporium. I should probably report this to the Lord. The girl in leather armor took the glasses off that were in actuality a special high-level detection tool. Thanks to it she was able to go through the strange runic store. Her name was Mary and she spent the last week investigating this new city called Albrook. Her days were spent scouring the area for potential points of interest for her Lord Arthur. She went to obvious locations like the Dwarven Union headquarters and the town hall. There she investigated everything mostly from the eye of the commoner. At nights she visited taverns and even made her way into the red light district. She knew ways to make people talk via some special skills that she picked up in her life. With a combination of them and alcohol, it wasn't that hard to make the people talk about the topic that she was interested in. When they lost their inhibitions, the information that she received was mostly the truth. But everyone had their own angle, so there were some contradicting topics. One of them was the town RuneSmith, who was somewhat an oddball. The people from the Dwarven Union and the merchant faction seemed to have it out for him. From what she knew, it was a long-lasting feud that not many were informed about. All of the conflicting rumors caused Mary quite a headache, so she had to see if this RuneSmith was really the bastard that the Dwarven Union painted him out to be. Her first run-in with the man was not in his store or smithy, it was actually during some strange dispute over an orphanage. The glasses that she was wearing were some high-quality goods, but even with them, his status page was some kind of jumbled-up mess. Besides his level that was close to 120, she couldn't really pick up anything substantial. The problem there was that it went against one of her strength measuring skills. It told her that the man was not that simple and he should be far over that level, not quite tier 3 but somewhat above what she would expect from a tier 2 RuneSmith. She could only speculate on the cause, but for now, she decided to go back to the Lord's estate. The time was up and she needed to make a report to her master. As she went back, the busy city became apparent to her. While it looked fine on the outside, after spending a week in disguise she could see the looming shadow over it. The report would not be a good one, as the city was already being ravaged by a couple of powerful organizations from within. From her perspective, there were a couple of options that her lord could go with. One would be to remain passive and just accept the current power structure. His position would probably be secured and the powers within wouldn't see him as much of a problem. This was the safest route from which he could probably expect some good hush money. With time this could develop further, but he wouldn't really gain much true power from this approach, besides lining his pockets with money which he could somewhat use to gain some power. But power gained only through money was quite shallow in her opinion. All the current rich merchants would still be the ones in charge, while he just received bribes to make it easier for them. This would also force him to be lenient with those greedy lot, covering for their misgivings if they ever got caught, which could lower his standing in the eyes of the commoners. The other option would be the more combative one, where he took a more just approach. This meant rejecting the proposals that could gain him a lot of money but the ire of others. In favor of furthering the trust with the people, he might have to get on the bad side of the current overlords of the city. But Mary didn't really care either way. If her master decided to take the easy route, it was fine. With enough money, he might even be able to bribe enough people to set his mother free from her prison. Then all of them could just leisurely spend their lives here. Thus she returned to the Lord's mansion. Before she could enter through, there appeared a bit of a problem. Halt! Mary was still a new face around here and she made a quick getaway the moment they arrived. No one besides the 2 personal guards that they took from the main house knew who she was. Due to this, the group of guards that were at the entrance saw her as nothing more than someone that was here to cause some trouble. As I have explained, I'm Lord Arthur's personal maid. It was no use, the guards weren't letting her through. The replacement maid that she procured for the Lord had been already working for a week. It also didn't help that she purposely sneaked out during the night without anyone noticing. I guess it can't be helped. Without wanting to cause a scene, she decided to wait for nightfall. Arthur, her lord, was probably busy with work, so it would be impossible to reach him at the moment, The easiest way would be to wait and sneak back in. Without a proper light system in the city, the mansion wasn't lit that well. The guards were left with magical lanterns or torches which they used to patrol the premises. There were quite a lot of them, but for someone like her, there were enough blind spots to make her way in. After waiting for the proper moment, she made her way past the wall. Her footsteps remained silent as she ran right up the 3-meter-tall obstacle and quickly jumped into some nearby bushes. Mary's form was covered head to toe in black, only her eyes were peeking out through her new set of clothes that she changed into. This special gear made maneuvering in the dark quite easy. Blending into the night was somewhat of a specialty of the class that she picked up. While true invisibility and merging her being with the shadows was not possible yet, if she ever managed to reach Tier 3 of this class it would be possible. There were other classes with abilities like this, but for espionage and sneaking around, hers was the best suited one. The guards that she passed by had no ability to detect her. Even if they had guard dogs that could pick up on various new scents, she had none that they could pick up on. Within a few minutes, she made her way towards one of the windows. Her body contorted like a pretzel as she slid in through one that seemed too small for a person to fit in. There are. As she was making her way through the ceiling, she spotted one of her friends that was together with someone she didn't recognize. It was impossible for both of the knights to be the only ones remaining by Arthur's side. They were still only human and needed to sleep. It seemed that for now, they partnered up with some other guards while keeping one of them by the Lord's side at all times. Without bothering the guards, she made it around the corner as she headed for her own little room. Thanks to being the Lord's personal maid, she received one room for herself, and it came with a key. Inside she found a change of clothes along with some of her personal belongings that she left a week ago. After taking a look into the mirror, she decided to leave. She knew her young lord's wishes and that he would probably want to get a report before the day ended. Now when she was properly dressed as a maid, the guards didn't seem to mind. A bit sloppy, she thought after smiling at a guard duo that was patrolling the inside of the mansion. If she was an actual assassin who came to take the Lord's life, it didn't seem that there would be much of a problem. Who goes there? It is me, Sir Gareth. Gareth, one of the knights, was quick to react when he saw her approaching from afar. The other guards didn't seem to notice, even though she was not trying to actively hide her presence. Even the tray with snacks and tea that she was holding didn't seem to make any noise. Everyone stand down, it's the young lord's personal maid. Mary, the lord has been waiting for you, what took you so long? The other guards were quick to raise their spears but quickly looked at the woman before them. Being something like a personal maid brought some prestige with itself, so the men here closely looked at her face to ingrain it. If they ever did something to the maid, it could bring the ire of the Lord at them. Oh, you know, this and that, why were you worried about little ol me? Well, isn't that cute? Mary gave Gareth a wink which caused the man to recoil. The other two guards that were with him were smitten by the sensual look, but their leader seemed to know something more. After a moment Mary was at the door knocking. Only when Arthur's voice sounded from within did she answer. Yes? Who is it? It's me, my lord. Mary? Please enter. Soon the maid made her way inside of the room. While the other two guards' imaginations were going wild, Gareth knew about this maid's true nature. To them, it looked like a nightly visit from a beautiful maid, but to him, it was just more worries. You took your time, Mary. I must apologize, my lord, I will accept any punishment you may deem fitting. Mary lowered her head after entering through the door. There she saw a somewhat tired-looking young man that was surrounded by various notes and books. It was clear that he continued to work diligently through this week. Mary, please, I'm not in the mood for your games. Arthur looked back at the girl with the cat ears. They were bright red but not as red as her eyes were. The young man turned from his seat while rubbing his tired eyes. It was clear that he was in no mood for pleasantries. Mary, on the other hand, couldn't help from giggling. She did love to see Arthur working hard, as it was one of the reasons that she decided to come here with him. The young man was quite pure in his convictions and was also not scared to work to make things a reality. Would you like some tea? It's my special brew. It will help wake you up. Arthur glanced at the tray that Mary was holding. On it, he could see some biscuits and dark tea. Without a second thought, he nodded his head as getting something to wake him up would be appreciated. After taking a few sips from the somewhat bitter concoction, he started feeling his mind becoming clearer. What did you find? Don't spare the details. What ensued was over an hour of her report. She informed Arthur about the power structure of Albrook City that was mostly ruled by the rich merchants and craftsmen. The Dwarven Union came up quite a bit, thanks to there being so many adventurers in this city. They were making most of the profit. Crafty dwarves, with the dungeon here, they are practically monopolizing the market. As it was clear that the driving force behind this city were the adventurers, the people that provided them with weapons would prosper. Then there were the alchemists that controlled the vast potion market. But due to the Adventurer Guild already providing this service in-house, they weren't profiting as much as the dwarves. Potions could be easily transported from city to city without the need of large shops to display them. The adventurers also bought them in bulk, which lowered the price margin. Even with that, they were part of the prominent players in the city. Then there was the more murky element in the city, the Thieves' Guild. Mary was able to pay it a visit to figure out that they were the ones controlling the red light district. Drugs and aphrodisiacs were some of the many forbidden items that they offered there. That does seem like a problem. Arthur received the whole report, and now it was already quite late. One part of it all was the intelligence gathering that Mary performed, but only after confirming it with the records that he went through could Arthur paste it together. It seems that most of the officials are receiving some donations. Arthur went through a large chunk of transactions and disputes that previously went through the city. In them he found that whenever a person from the Merchant Guild or Dwarven Union was involved, the decision always went their way. It was almost unanimous. Such a result was only possible if one side was getting favored. Yes, I've met some of the old residents in the city. A lot of them had lost their old homes if they were close to the merchant district. The merchant district was recently created. It was mostly populated by stores and taverns. It was made to house these wandering money makers and offer them a good time. The previous residents were mostly bought out or found themselves disappearing under murky circumstances. Though my lord, this isn't anything surprising. Isn't this how it always goes when a new dungeon gets discovered? The rich get richer while the poor. Well, that is that one strange person though. Ah yes, you have mentioned him a couple of times. Wayland, was it? Yes. Mary nodded while clapping with her hands. Her tail started wiggling about, which indicated to Arthur that she was somewhat excited. If his maid was acting this way, it meant that this person named Wayland was someone that he should watch out for. Come to think of it, I think a package arrived today. Arthur looked to the side. There a small pile of presents of various sizes was stashed for safekeeping. The merchants and influential people had sent him presents that he didn't have time to go through, but now after hearing the explanation from his maid, he was interested in the latest one that was delivered in a large wooden crate. Chapter 180. What's that? Looks like some high-quality spirit, something the dwarves probably value more than we do. Just place it on that side then. At the city lord's estate, Arthur and his maid, Mary, were going through the gifts sent to them by the various people in the city. This was a known custom of the land, so it was something they expected. Most of the gifts arrived a few days ago, but the one that Arthur was mostly interested in was brought in the day before. Precious gems, valuable elixirs, and costly alcohol. I'm not sure that I like this painting too much though, at least they tried. Mary was organizing the gifts by their worth. Some of them were slightly in bad taste, like a large painting of Arthur's father. The person that decided on it probably didn't think that the father-son relationship wasn't as bad. Then there were some costly items. The merchants and dwarves did show off their wealth. While the bottle of alcohol might have seemed like a bad gift, it would probably fetch the largest price at the auction house. It was quite the rare delicious concoction that a lot of people would pay many gold coins for. I'm not sure what that person from the Adventurers Guild is thinking though. Mary looked down to Arthur's hands in which he was holding a letter. This was the only thing they received from the Adventurers Guild. While the gifts here weren't all that special, they were still adequate. They know their position, not like I can run the biggest business out of the city. Arthur just shrugged as the Adventurers Guild was somewhat at a different scale than the others. While he could use his name to bully the others, he would not be able to do the same with the Adventurers Guild. Their monopoly on everything dungeon-related was widespread throughout the entire kingdom. Even the high nobles had to keep an eye out for the guild masters. But this didn't mean that they had to bow down to the common adventurer, those were still nothing more than convenient workers to them. They could have at least sent a gift basket instead. Mary pouted while grabbing the last box. It was somewhat heavy but not for someone that was a Tier 2 class holder. It was a regular wooden box that was nailed shut from the top. This was not a problem for Mary, she just slipped her slender fingers into the small gap at the top and quickly pried it open while the nails remained stuck to the wood. Oh my, this looks interesting. The maid reached into the box while Arthur looked from the side. The interesting look that his retainer was showing didn't come out often, so he was somewhat intrigued. Soon the content was revealed to be some strange metallic contraption with 6 legs that looked like a spider. Is that a golem? It does look like one, my lord, but I haven't seen this type before. While golems were considered rare, they could be spotted here and there. Most people, when they heard the name, an image of a monster popped into their heads. They were usually large hulks in dungeons that were of a more humanoid shape. They had a reputation for being a tough cookie to crack, even more, if their golem core was not exposed. It's not working. Mary placed the strange-looking contraption that was supposed to be a golem down on the ground, but it didn't move. Neither she or Arthur knew anything about runic golems, at most they saw some at the auction houses or ones in the banks used for protection. Wait, there is something in the box, my lord. The maid reached into the box that was filled out with straw and pulled out a small booklet. This reminded her of the time she was at the Runic Emporium. There too were instruction manuals for some of the wares being sold. Just as she had suspected, the instruction pointed to something. Look at this, Lord Arthur, we are supposed to use something called the remote control. Oh, interesting. Arthur was handed the instruction manual while Mary went digging for this remote control object. She stuck her head right in, and after some searching, she found a smaller paper box inside this large wooden one. This wasn't all, as inside this paper box besides the remote she found a small cylinder with some glowing liquid. I don't understand, what are we supposed to do with this, Lord Arthur? She asked while looking at the young man, but instead of getting a reply, there was silence. When turning, she noticed that her lord was busy reading the instruction manual with quite the sparkle in his eyes. This was not something that she expected to see. The young lord that she knew rarely showed this expression. Only when around his mother did he ever drop his guard like this. I see now, this shouldn't be difficult. Could you hand me that box, Mary? Arthur quickly got to work on the contraption after going through the instruction manual. While he worked, Mary was handed the small booklet. There were detailed drawings of everything that was included in this box along with the golem. The first thing that Arthur needed to do was place the container with the glowing liquid into the golem. It was a bit strange for the noble lord to be the one assembling this golem, but he did look happy. There was a small screwdriver that he had to use. It opened up a small latch on the side into which he could stick the canister in. From the manual, he knew that in this canister there was mana fluid to power the golem. The design was quite simple, and it would be just as simple to refill it with a new one. This was the power source without which the golem could not function. After connecting this part and closing the latch, most of the work was done. What was left now was to use the remote control. Arthur injected a little bit of mana into it, and the moment he did, he could see some small runes starting to glow. There was a large red button at the rightmost corner of this rectangular-looking item. When he pressed it, the golem was activated. The small eye that was at the front started glowing, and the legs followed soon after. Mary moved to her lord's side. As this was still a golem, it could very well be some kind of trap. Lord Arthur, be careful, we don't know what this golem is, it could. What? Do you think someone would be stupid enough to assassinate the new Lord of Albrook? Arthur laughed as he didn't think that he had enough worth for anyone to go after his head. No one would gain anything but the ire of the Valyrian household by causing him harm. He knew that his family would be forced to send in some powerful knights to look into this matter if he ever died. For the perpetrator, this would be a nightmare as they would chase them down for daring to soil their perfect family name. While he was chuckling, his battle-maid retainer saw things differently as she placed herself between her master and the spider droid. When activated, the legs pushed the body off the ground and quickly turned toward Arthur. "Calm down, Mary," the instruction said that when activated the golem would interface with whoever was holding this remote control, it would then imprint onto their mana signature. Mary was somewhat confused by the explanation, but Arthur was knowledgeable enough to know what this meant. This remote was something similar to a control rod, but instead of having to constantly hold it, he only needed to go through the procedure once. After that, the golem was supposed to react to some voiced commands. This was made apparent after the golem quickly went into standby mode. Its eye that was glowing green turned blue and it curled up its legs. Now it looked like some kind of sleeping spider that was ready to pounce on someone. The instruction said that there were some existing runic programs, but I'm not sure what that means. Before Arthur could press another button from the remote, Mary interrupted him instead. "Lord Arthur, wouldn't it be better if we did this outside? I don't think we need to be this close to the golem." Arthur gave out a sigh but nodded. His lady retainer was still afraid that this magical contraption could explode or something. Even if it wasn't made to hurt the new owner, it didn't mean that it was safe to be around it. Mana fluid was quite known to be volatile as it was concentrated mana in liquid form. If handled without care, it could be overloaded to cause a large explosion. Thus both of them and the guards that were standing watch outside relocated to the courtyard. There the servants witnessed the strange spider droid performing some tricks. The remote control didn't really have that many buttons, but when Arthur clicked one, the droid started dancing around. Then another one made it perform a backflip, which was quite surprising for a golem. These magical creations were not known for their agility, already seeing one this small was quite surprising. This continued for about an hour until Arthur finally realized that he wasted so much time on playing. The golem didn't have any armaments, but it did have some visually stunning spells and one that produced a gentle tune. It was clear to him that this was just a presentation given to him by this RuneSmith. It was as if he was telling him that this was only a simple sample of what he could make a golem do. Arthur and Mary returned to the Lord's office for another quick discussion. After going through the gifts, there was a clear winner and his name was Wayland. This RuneSmith should be more famous if he can create such marvels of magical engineering, but the spider droid was to the side and not turned off. Arthur on the other hand grabbed the log of the items sold at the Valyrian family auction house. Just as he had expected, there were no listings with Wayland's name as the seller. This Wayland could be a potential asset. "You think so too, my lord?" "Yes, he must clearly have a grudge against the merchants and the Dwarven Union, but why did he decide to stay here? I don't really understand. There must be many better cities for a craftsman of his caliber. He should be able to easily find one where they would accept a human runesmith." To Arthur it was a mystery. The man just showed up out of nowhere and decided to go against a huge behemoth like the Dwarven Union. It didn't seem that he was purely motivated by monetary gains. Mary also informed him about the orphanage situation, which painted Wayland in a more favorable light. "Mary." "Yes, Lord Arthur." "Could you fetch Ferdinand for me?" "Of course, my lord." "Oh, and prepare the carriage, I'll be making a trip to the auction house." Arthur made a decision. After going through all of the paperwork that he had in this mansion, he was ready to make his first move. It didn't look like he would be getting much out of the old merchants. They had rooted themselves in the city and their web of contacts was wide. But there was one dark horse in this city that had potential. This was of course the city's runesmith, Wayland. From everyone here, the man had the most potential and his morals also seemed to be in line with Arthur's. Thus he made a decision to reach out to him with an olive branch. Back at the workshop, Wayland along with his two helpers was working tirelessly. They didn't sleep for a few days again, and Bernier along with Diana were showing clear signs of exhaustion. "Wayland Sugar, I know that this is important, but I think we need to take a break," Diana called out while being covered in sweat. A rather sloppy-looking Bernier was down on the ground. Roland looked back to his two exhausted assistants while also panting slightly. Since the reveal that the orphanage had been timed to be sold, he had tossed himself into a working frenzy. The spider droid that he was supposed to fix in a week he knocked out in 2 days. He even drew up a custom instruction manual along with a special remote to go with it. He wasn't sure what he was hoping for, as his expectations towards the new young lord were quite low. Even if he piqued his interest with his golem, he wasn't really sure what that would give him. Would the person force the inspector to change their mind for him? He couldn't see the noble brat just help him for nothing, and signing an unfavorable contract to save Elydia's orphanage was the last thing he wanted to do. "Ah yes, sure, take the rest of the day off, we are already ahead of schedule, we'll be able to assemble the new smelter with this amount." Roland dropped the hammer to the ground while Diana looked at him with a troubled expression. Like before, Bernier was hoisted over her shoulder and carried out of the heated-up workshop. While his fire resistance skill had leveled up, it was nowhere close to reaching the other two. The inability for him to do anything about the orphanage situation was slowly eating away at him. Unbeknownst to Elydia, he had Lobelia clue him in on everything through the help of the Thieves' Guild contacts. Apparently, the merchant they were dealing with had been involved with Albrook even before the dungeon appeared. The house that they had received had almost no worth before the Adventurer Guild appeared in the city, and this was the main reason Elydia managed to get it. At the start of Albrook's rise, everything was still dirt cheap. Thanks to this, some of the first residents were able to get in good deals. This did probably leave a bad taste in some of the sellers' mouths. The contract that was signed was one of the more basic ones. The clause about the safety issues concerning children was not really taken seriously by many people and was mostly forgotten with time. It was still in there and now offered this man a way back to getting his old house. If he was successful in his scheme, the money from which he could sell it would be more than 10 times what Elydia bought it for. But from Roland's standpoint, this was probably not the reason for going to this length. Instead, he was playing the long game. Other merchants were seen buying up other buildings or renting them. The explosion of new adventurers was still on the rise and would certainly go on for another few years. This dungeon was a very newbie-friendly one. Thanks to this, an adventurer could spend many years here grinding on their levels before ever needing to move towards a higher-ranked dungeon, that is if they even made it that far. Bastard probably wants to split it up into rooms and make some kind of dorm for the adventurers. Roland started walking out of the workshop to clear his head while grumbling. A good way of making money in this city was through small bedrooms for the adventurers to live in. As long as they had a bed they were fine, and with a constant stream of monster parts they could afford a higher price point. Lobelia also brought him some troubling information. At first, he thought about forking up the money for the entire orphanage building. Regretfully, it didn't seem that the merchant was willing to sell it even if the price was many times over its real value. He would also like to evade any unlawful ways of clearing up this problem, as the inspector was one of the more influential officials of the city. It didn't seem like threatening him would do them any good or would be easy to pull off. But it seemed that it was one of the few options that he had. It might be possible to pay the Thief Guild a steep sum to take care of this problem. Then the other option would be to set up a temporary shelter for the kids close to his home. The cheapest option would be to use tents that usually adventurers camped out in the wilderness. The thought of so many brats running around his workshop was already giving him a headache. Leaving them out on the streets didn't seem right though. He had not yet discussed this option with Elydia, as he knew that she would probably not ask him for help. He was planning on telling her his tent plan soon though. Elydia did seem in a big rut ever since this predicament started. Probably having someone that she could rely on would ease her nerves. Before he could reveal his lackluster plan though, he got an unknown visitor. As he was taking a stroll through his yard, he decided to go outside and check up on Elydia. There, right as he was opening the gate, he met up with a certain person. The moment he saw him he almost laid an egg as he recognized him from various events and speeches that he made in the city. It was the old city mayor.